I know, but I'm going to school for cinematography, and I plan to make a big...
She lit up runways and magazine covers without even trying. Everyone wanted her, photographers, designers. The whole world watched her rise like magic. But behind the beauty was a storm no one really saw. At just 26, she was gone. And when she passed away, the very industry that made her a star, not a single soul showed up. Join us as we uncover Gia Carangi's heartbreaking journey. Who is Gia Marie Carangi? Back in the 1977, nobody had even heard of the word supermodel. Models were just pretty faces who wore clothes and kept quiet about their lives. But then came this bold 17-year-old girl from Northeast Philadelphia who was about to shake things up. Her name was Gia Marie Carangi, and everything about her screamed different. She wasn't born into glamour or fame. Her roots were working class. Her dad, an Italian-American, owned sandwich shops, and her mom, who had Irish and Welsh heritage, walked away when Gia was just 11. Gia didn't grow up like the other kids. She stood out, and not just because of her long legs or striking brown eyes. She was part of the crowd that listened to David Bowie, wore glitter, played with gender, and gave no care for what people thought was normal. In her neighborhood, being different wasn't something people celebrated. It was a tough, blue-collar area where the rules were clear, men worked hard with their hands, women stayed home, and nobody talked about going against the grain. But Gia didn't fit into any of those boxes. She was tall, had an intense stare, and carried herself with a boldness that was hard to ignore. Her father, Joe, tried to hold it together after her mother left. He ran his shops, worked long days, and came home to find his daughter painting her nails black and blasting music so loud it shook the walls. He was just trying to make ends meet, yet his daughter was growing into someone he couldn't quite figure out. From early on, Gia never tried to hide who she was. She was openly gay at a time when people were terrified to admit it, and she wasn't quietly gay, she was completely unafraid. In high school, she'd send flowers to girls she liked. She even joked that being with a man was no different than being with a dog.
I still haven't finished my growing pains, but as soon as I do, I'll be fine.
This was during a time when most people still pretended big-name celebrities were straight. But Gia didn't play pretend. She lived openly and honestly, even when it meant dealing with stares and whispers behind her back. Teachers raised eyebrows at the way she dressed, and students gossiped in the hallways. But none of it fazed her. Gia had this rare gift. She didn't care what anyone thought. She was who she was, and that was that. Her confidence was almost wild, like she was living in her own world, and everyone else was just catching up. Then one night, while dancing in a Philadelphia nightclub, lost in the music and the moment, something happened. A photographer noticed her, and just like that, her wild, messy, beautiful journey into the spotlight was about to begin. So, keep watching to know how it all happened. Taking over the modeling world. Just a few weeks after being spotted in that Philly nightclub, Gia was already on her way to New York. It was pouring rain and she was completely drenched, wearing clothes that made her look more like a teenage boy than someone chasing a modeling dream. But she didn't care. With all that boldness packed into her, she walked right into Wilhelmina Models, one of the biggest and best modeling agencies in the world. The woman in charge, Wilhelmina Cooper, took one look at this soaking wet girl from Philadelphia and didn't need a second. No test photos, no questions, just a simple yes. She knew instantly this wasn't just another model. This was someone who could change the game. Gia had that rare spark you can't explain. It wasn't about beauty alone, it was something deeper. A kind of magic you either have or you don't. And Gia had it, even before the world knew her name. Not long after signing, she landed her first major shoot in October 1978. It was wild and daring. Famous photographer Chris von Wangenheim placed her behind a metal fence, completely nude, along with makeup artist Sandy Linter, also unclothed. The shoot was bold, risky, and perfectly matched the rebellious spirit of fashion at the time. And just like that, Gia's name exploded. By the end of that same year, Vogue was already chasing her. Her rise wasn't slow or steady, it was instant. She didn't have to crawl her way up like most models did. One moment she was just a teenager from Philly, and the next she was everywhere. Even Gia once said she didn't work her way into modeling, she just sort of stepped into it, and it fit. Wilhelmina Cooper wasn't just her agent, she quickly became like the mother Gia had lost. She offered a sense of protection, a strong guide in a world that moved too fast and didn't always care who it left behind. Cooper had a sharp eye for talent and knew how to spot someone who could go beyond fashion. When she saw Gia, she didn't just see a model. She saw a star. A girl with fire in her eyes, attitude in her walk, and something dangerously unforgettable in her presence. But she also noticed the softness inside, the fragile heart still learning to survive in a world full of pressure and eyes watching. Under Wilhelmina's care, Gia wasn't just safe, she was unstoppable. By April 1979, she was on the cover of British Vogue at only 19. That same month, Vogue Paris featured her. A year later, she was on the cover of American Vogue. Then Vogue Italia. The magazines couldn't get enough of her. Between 1979 and 1982, Cosmopolitan featured her 5 times. The famous photographer Francesco Scavullo even called her the ultimate cover girl, his favorite face for the magazine.
Great, like that, right in here. Tilt your head over a bit. Tilt it over a bit. Gia is a...
By the 1980s, Gia was earning $500,000 a year, an unbelievable amount at the time, especially for someone just 20 years old. Designers like Armani, Dior, Versace, and Yves Saint Laurent were all calling her name. She wasn't just working in fashion, she was becoming fashion itself. Everyone simply called her Gia, no last name needed. Like a rock star or icon, her name stood alone. And while all of this was happening, she never hid who she was. She continued living openly as a gay woman. Something nearly unheard of in her industry during those years. She didn't shy away from showing love either. She pursued Sandy Linter, the same makeup artist from that first bold photo shoot, sending her flowers and even showing up at her place, fearless in love, just as she was in life. Gia wasn't just building a career, she was rewriting what a model could be and doing it all with fire in her eyes and truth in her heart. While most celebrities were still pretending to be something they weren't, Gia was out in the open, loving women without fear. She wasn't trying to hide who she was. At a time when people in the spotlight played it safe, she dared to be real. But then, everything became easier because someone was right behind her. The guide that never lasted. In 1980, she even appeared in Blondie's music video for Atomic, dancing in a pair of oversized goggles like she ruled the end of the world. That's just who she was. Always ahead of the curve, always effortlessly cool. And through everything, Wilhelmina Cooper stayed close, guiding her, protecting her, doing everything she could to keep Gia focused and working. But New York in the late 70s and early 80s was wild. Studio 54 was in full swing, substances were easy to find, and the fashion industry was spinning like a storm. Wilhelmina tried hard to keep Gia on solid ground, but it wasn't easy. Gia wasn't the kind of person you could tie down. She was drawn to the chaos, diving right into it like it was part of the adventure. One thing that still amazes people is the way Gia walked the runway. No one has ever moved quite like her. The moment she stepped onto the catwalk, it wasn't just about clothes or posture. It was like she controlled the space around her, the air, the light, and everything. She didn't follow the usual model steps. She floated. Her walk had a smooth, dreamlike rhythm to it, like she was hearing music no one else could hear. It wasn't performance, it was presence. She turned the runway into her world, and every time she stepped out, it felt like something magical was happening. The biggest names in fashion photography, Arthur Elgort, Richard Avedon, Francesco Scavullo, were all lining up just to work with her.
And he, of course, did Gia's hair for many, many, many shoots with Francesco Scavullo and with other photographers.
And it wasn't only about her looks. There was something about Gia when she stood in front of a camera, something that couldn't be explained, only felt. Even Scavullo, who had photographed the most famous people in the world, admitted that when Gia walked into his studio, it made him pause. She had that effect, the kind that left people speechless. She brought something fresh to modeling, something nobody had seen before. She was free, tough, and sharp, with a deep, street-smart charm that made her unpredictable but incredible to work with. She didn't pose like other models. She moved freely, made you chase her with the camera, made you work to capture her magic. She broke every mold. While the fashion world was obsessed with perfect blondes and beachy girls, Gia came in with dark hair, a raw attitude, and a style that felt almost like both a girl and a boy at once. When others tried to look polished and perfect, Gia showed up looking real, like someone who wasn't trying to be anyone but herself. She once said that models were just meant to show off the clothes, get paid, and leave, but with Gia, no one even noticed the clothes. She stole all the attention. Some photographers talked about how the energy shifted the second she walked into a room. People stopped talking. Even the most unimpressed industry insiders felt it. She didn't just model. She took over the space, made it hers, and made you forget to even breathe. That was Gia, one of a kind, unforgettable, and absolutely electric. Even the most experienced names in fashion would stop and stare when Gia walked by. Yes, she was stunning. No one could deny that, but it wasn't just about her looks. There was something else, something you couldn't explain. She had a kind of presence that filled a room, even when she wasn't speaking. The way she stepped onto a runway was pure magic. Those brief seconds, maybe 5 or 10, were her favorite part of everything. Not the long waits, not the hours of styling, but that fleeting moment where she could break free and just exist, untouched, wild, and fully herself. All the while, Gia was still chasing Sandy Linter, the woman who had once stood beside her during that daring first photo shoot. Gia loved her with the raw intensity of a young heart, messy, sweet, and full of hope. And Sandy felt it too. Their relationship wasn't fiery or dramatic, but there was real love there. Imagine what it felt like to be loved by someone like Gia, to be the center of her full, undivided attention. That kind of love was rare, and Sandy never forgot it. This was the height of Gia's fame. She was everywhere, posing for the biggest magazines, dancing at the wildest clubs, photographed by the world's best. She had reached that rare level where just one name was enough. Gia didn't need a last name anymore. Everyone knew who she was. She was powerful. She was everything. But everything was about to collapse. March 1980 became the month everything changed. That was when Wilhelmina Cooper, the woman who had discovered Gia, who had guided her like a second mother, was told she had lung cancer. And not the kind you could fight off with optimism and treatment. This was the kind that gave no second chances. She was dying, and quickly. People often forget just how deep the bond between Gia and Wilhelmina really was. It wasn't just about modeling contracts and photo shoots. Wilhelmina had seen herself in Gia young, determined, on fire for success. She didn't just take Gia on as a client. She took her into her heart, becoming the closest thing to a mother Gia had known since her childhood. Gia, who had been abandoned so young, finally felt truly seen, truly supported. Watching Wilhelmina fade away crushed her. It wasn't just the loss of a mentor, it was losing her anchor. The only person in New York who really understood her, who looked past the attitude and saw something beautiful inside, was slipping away. And there was nothing Gia could do to stop it. Wilhelmina passed on March 1st, 1980. She was just 40 years old. And Gia? She broke down. Her world started falling apart piece by piece. The clubs she once danced in, Studio 54, the Mud Club, weren't just fun places anymore. They became her escape. These weren't just night spots filled with music and fashion. They were places overflowing with substances, pills passed around like candy, and a particular type of new substance that was starting to creep into the scene quietly, and this really destroyed Gia. Effects of Wilhelmina Cooper's death. Losing someone you love at such a young age does strange things to the heart. Grief can pull you under fast, and Gia, barely 20, didn't know how to handle it. The one person who had helped her keep her balance was gone, and the world she had once danced through so fearlessly suddenly became a blur of pain, confusion, and dangerous choices. Gia had always loved the party scene, the flashing lights, the flowing champagne, a little Coke here and there, maybe a pill to slow things down when it got too loud. But this wasn't that anymore. This wasn't about fun or thrill. After Wilhelmina passed, something shifted. Now she was using it to escape a kind of pain that felt like it was digging into her soul. Gia believed she had control, told herself that as long as she didn't use needles, she'd be fine. She thought if she only snorted it, she could walk away whenever she wanted. A lot of people believed that back then, but the truth is, addiction doesn't play by anyone's rules. The grief was too much. Her world had lost its center, the woman who had kept her steady was gone, and Gia's way of dealing with that heartbreak was to get high. First just now and then more often, and before long, it became her new normal. By the end of 1980, she was doing the very thing she once swore she would never touch, which was injecting. The spiral wasn't slow, it was sudden and sharp, like watching a star fall from the sky and fast forward. The fashion world, so quick to crown new stars, was just as fast at turning its back. One moment she was earning hundreds of thousands, and the next, her phone stopped ringing. The fall was cold and unforgiving. By the late 1980s, Gia was showing up to jobs visibly high, not just tipsy, not just dazed, gone. On one photo shoot in the Caribbean, she broke down in tears because she couldn't find her fix. The photographer, Francesco Scavullo, who cared deeply for her, had to lay her down gently and let her sleep it off like a child. But soon, the signs were everywhere. The damage was no longer something she could hide. In November 1980, during a shoot for Vogue, The marks on her arms were clear, small red scars climbing up her skin, each one a silent confession of how far things had gone. The editors did their best to cover them up, but everyone could see the truth. There was even a story about a famous cover where Gia posed with her arms tucked behind her back. People whispered it was to hide the track marks. Scavullo always said it was just for the photo's look, not to cover anything. But the fact that such a rumor existed at all said more than enough. The girl who once lit up every room was now dimming fast. Not because she lost her talent, but because the pain inside her was louder than the applause. Embracing the next move. Around the time all these were happening, Gia made a big move by leaving the agency and signing with Ford Models. This wasn't just any agency, this was Eileen Ford territory, the woman who had shaped the modeling world into what it was. Eileen took one look at Gia, noticed her troubling behavior, and within just 3 weeks, she made a decision that she couldn't work with her. That was it. Just like that, Gia, who had once been at the top of everyone's list, suddenly found herself unwanted. Her fall from grace was fast, sharp, and painful. Friends who once adored her started to back off. Sandy Linter, someone Gia really cared about, had no choice but to distance herself. Things had gotten out of hand. Gia, deep in her addiction, had tried to inject Sandy with substances. Sandy, exhausted and overwhelmed, gave in out of sheer emotional fatigue. She let it happen, passed out for 16 hours, and afterward knew she had to step away completely. Gia wasn't just falling, she was dragging others down with her. Being around her had become risky, even career-ending. In less than a year, Gia went from being the darling of fashion to being avoided like a storm. By March 1981, things had taken a dangerous turn. She was driving while under the influence, smashed through a fence, ran from the police, and was caught with substances and alcohol in her system. She gave rehab a shot for 21 days and then moved back to Philadelphia to live with her mother. And for a brief moment, it looked like she might turn her life around. But addiction is cruel like that. It waits patiently, whispering, always ready to take control again. Gia did try, though. That's the heartbreaking part. She wanted to get back on her feet. Toward the end of 1981, she began calling around, asking for another opportunity. Elite Model Management, led by Monique Pillard, decided to take a chance on her. Most clients didn't want anything to do with Gia anymore. Her name alone made people nervous. But Francesco Scavullo, the photographer who had always believed in her, had a plan. He thought maybe, just maybe, one more Cosmopolitan cover could give her the comeback she needed. When that cover was released in April 1982, the reaction was mixed. She was still breathtaking, no one could deny that, but her eyes told a different story. They looked hollow, like the light behind them had gone out. People could see the sadness, the weight she was carrying. She landed a few more jobs after that, including catalog shoots with Albert Watson and even a Versace campaign with Richard Avedon. For a moment, hope came back. Maybe she could reclaim her place. But then, something happened during the Versace shoot that changed everything again. The fail and legacy that refused to end. In the last few months of 1982, things looked like they were finally turning around for Gia. She was on a big project, the kind that could have brought her back to the top. Real money, real exposure. It was one of those rare shoots that had the power to change everything. Everyone was watching, hopeful. But in the middle of it all, Gia quietly told the crew she was stepping out to buy cigarettes. She never returned. Just like that, she vanished from one of the most high-profile shoots in the industry. From that moment on, her name stopped being mentioned in the rooms that once celebrated her. Big designers stopped calling. People she once worked with pretended she didn't exist. That day marked the end of her modeling career with Versace and many others who had once fought to book her. She didn't give up immediately. Gia tried different treatments, enrolled in methadone programs, and tried to live clean. But nothing lasted. By the time that year ended, there were no more jobs, no more photo shoots, no more runway shows. The offers dried up, and so did her income. In early 1983, she got one last chance, a modeling trip to Tunisia for a German catalog. But things didn't go well. She was caught using heroin while on the job, and they quickly sent her back home. She was only 22, and her career was already completely gone. She packed her things, left New York, and went back to her hometown, Philadelphia. The fashion world had already moved on. No one waited for her return. No one asked about her anymore. It was as if she had never been there. With her modeling days behind her, Gia tried to build a new life, but it wasn't easy. From 1983 to 1985, she drifted from place to place, staying with family, crashing with friends, falling in and out of short relationships. The money was long gone, mostly spent on substances. She gave other jobs a shot, working in a cafeteria, folding clothes in retail stores, even helping out in a nursing home. She took photography classes too, trying to find a new path, something meaningful to hold on to. But every time she tried to rebuild, the substances pulled her back in. By the end of 1985, Gia had ended up in Atlantic City, and life had taken a heartbreaking turn. Things got so bad that she started exchanging her body just to get enough money for her next fix. Imagine that. A girl who once smiled from 5 different Cosmopolitan covers was now walking the streets just to survive. That December, she landed in the hospital. She had pneumonia in both lungs and was seriously sick. While doctors were treating her, they decided to run some more tests. That's when they found something else. She had AIDS, and everything changed. At that particular time, people didn't really know what AIDS was all about. They just knew it was scary. It was deadly, there was no medicine to cure it, and it felt like a dark cloud that kept growing. And now, Gia had it. Yes, Gia, the same girl who once took the fashion world by storm. She had it, and things were getting worse fast. When Gia was nearing the end, she shared something deeply personal with a friend. She said she wasn't scared of dying. What really haunted her was the thought that everyone might forget her. Imagine that. After breaking barriers, after shining so bright in front of the world, her biggest fear wasn't death. It was being erased, like she had never even lived. By October of 1986, Gia was back in the hospital, this time in Philadelphia at Hahnemann University Hospital. She had wasted away to almost nothing. You wouldn't have recognized her at all. Just 6 years earlier, she had been the face of beauty. But now, she was a shadow of that girl, weakened and worn down. Then came November 18, 1986. That was the day Gia's fight ended. She passed away from complications caused by AIDS. She was just 26 years old. Not long after, on November 23rd, a funeral was held in Philadelphia. It was a quiet, simple service. But the part that cuts deep, the part that feels so cold, is that not one single person from the fashion world came. Not a single designer, not a single photographer. None of the brands or magazines she had worked with sent flowers or even a note. This was the same fashion industry that once celebrated her, used her face on covers all over the world, and built campaigns around her image. The same industry that watched her rise to the top didn't show up to say goodbye. When the local newspapers in Philadelphia wrote about her death, they didn't mention her fame. They printed a tiny notice that simply said a 26-year-old former model had passed away. That was all. No big tribute, no public mourning. Just a small mention, and that was it. One of the few people who still cared was Francesco Scavullo, the legendary photographer who had once captured Gia's magic in front of the camera. But even he didn't hear about her death right away. When he finally found out weeks later, he sent a mass card to her family, but by then Gia was already gone, buried quietly, and the world she once dazzled had already moved on. Still, stories like Gia's don't just fade away. No matter how hard the world tries to forget, her story finds its way back. Because she wasn't just a model, she was a symbol of something bigger. And though she left too soon, her life, her beauty, and her struggles still speak to people even now. In 1993, a journalist named Stephen Fried wrote a book that brought an old name back into conversations, Gia Carangi. His book, Thing of Beauty, uncovered the heartbreaking story of a young supermodel who had once taken the fashion world by storm and then disappeared far too soon. Suddenly, people were curious again. They wanted to know who she really was, why she vanished, and what happened to her. 5 years later, in 1998, her story reached millions when HBO turned it into a movie. A young Angelina Jolie played the role of Gia, delivering a performance that won her a Golden Globe. Almost overnight, people who had never even heard the name Gia were now deeply moved by her life and legacy. The world took notice, and the industry that once overlooked her couldn't look away anymore. Even Cindy Crawford shared that when she began modeling, people called her Baby Gia because of how much she looked like her. She said that many photographers picked her just because she reminded them of Gia's wild, stunning presence in front of the camera. Gia had left such a mark that even after her fall from grace, her image was still influencing who got chosen and who didn't. Gia lived without holding back. She loved fiercely. She burned bright and left the world too soon. But more than that, she left behind something real. A voice, a presence, a legacy. She reminded everyone that sometimes just a few seconds of being completely free can be more powerful than years spent trying to fit in. And if that doesn't make her unforgettable, nothing else could. With what you already know, do you think Gia's life would have been better if she had lived more? Let's hear from you in the comments. Remember to hit the like button and subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.